What's going on, everyone? So we are here today because we've got some new spoilers to talk about, including the biggest space unit in the entirety of Star Wars Unlimited, and actually just the biggest unit in general that we got to talk about, as well as a bunch of cards that were revealed over the past couple of days. A big thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. Thank you for supporting the channel, and also thank you for joining me in all of these various tournaments that we've been playing lately. But let's talk about our biggest unit yet, the Executor. 11 cost space unit in command villainy. It is a 12/12 Imperial vehicle capital ship. It has overwhelm, and it says when played on attack and when defeated, you can create 3 TIE fighter tokens. So not quite insane in terms of cost compared to the other unit that's a massive unit, which is the Finalizer, because it's the same cost. This one does have an extra point of power and toughness over the Finalizer, so it's that 12/12 as we mentioned. It is, on first glance, a Twin Suns card. It is not a premier card. The coolest thing I see you doing with the Executor here, and a lot of people have mentioned this one, is sneak attack, right? If you sneak attack this out, which can be pretty interesting, you get to trigger all 3 of the abilities. Now remember, sneak attack is 3 less and it costs 2 for itself, which means you're talking about 10 resources to be able to go ahead and sneak attack Executor out. But it comes down, it'll be a 12/12. You smack through something, which maybe you hit them for like 6 or 7 if it's a massive unit. And then you go ahead and keep your unit around while going ahead and killing their unit for at least until the end of the turn. And because you went played and you attacked with it, you're going to get those 6 TIE fighter tokens. And then it'll die at the end of the turn with sneak attack. And, well, you'll get 3 more tokens. So you'll get 9 TIE fighter tokens. Here's the problem with this card. Even with like sneak attack and doing fun things like that, it's not going to be that great, because if you're getting to the 10 resource point, or let's say you have Piet and you're able to go out and discount the Executor massively with 2 cost reduction, and you're ramping, so it's a 9 drop, or you have Piet and you're playing Piet yellow and you're triple dark rating this, right? So you have the 2 cost reduction and the additional 2 cost reduction on triple dark raid, so it's sitting at a 7 cost space unit. I still would prefer to have a lot of other options just in my deck, because yes, a 12/12 overwhelm that can go out and attack immediately is nice. It is a nice finisher in those situations, assuming it readies up immediately. But the additional TIE fighter tokens don't really do a whole lot, right? They represent like 3 points of damage, and it's a bunch of extra actions, and oftentimes just not worth it. That's at least what I found with these TIE fighter tokens in general. It's nice with Vader because Vader can go ahead and pump them with pilots or like Victor Leader. So unless you're going with that, and if you are going with that, well, you probably don't want to be playing 11 drop in your deck. This card just seems more like a fun Timmy card, as we would say in Magic, where you just drop a big fat spaceship and you hope to do some cool stuff with it. I don't really see this being really all that fantastic, and I definitely don't see this being great in Premier. Again, even in like, let's say Piet Red, which is in my opinion the best Piet deck, you're going to be sitting at a 9 drop, assuming Piet's out, by the way, which is not extremely common by the time you get to 9 resources, right? That's one of the reasons why like early Devastator exists, because you can play it somewhere around the time that Piet is still down, right? 8 resources discounted by 2, that puts you at 6 resources. It's the turn after Piet comes down, but this doesn't do anything to prevent you from dying. If you look at both Devastators, the 8-drop one with indirect damage essentially comes down and deals 4 to something, or a mix of 4 across a bunch of units. The big Devastator is a Sentinel and kills basically anything in any arena. And Ruthless Raider, cheap, way cheaper, half the cost basically, and comes down and deals damage. All the other capital ships are doing something, oftentimes to either like close out the game immediately, which this doesn't really do, with direct damage or indirect damage. We have the Planetary Bombardment, which is really nice with early capital ships. This is not an early capital ship. It's just big and does some minor things. So I guess that's cool in its own right. Hey, next up, we've got the Ghost. We were talking about the Ghost the other day. This is a 5 resource space unit, a 5/6 in vigilance heroism. It's got the rebel vehicle transport and specter tags. And this one's pretty interesting. So each other from the specter unit gains this unit's keyword. And while this unit is upgraded, it gains sentinel. So first off, it's going to give all of your other units sentinel, basically, because in order to give this keyword, it's most likely going to have some sort of upgrade. Now, there are some exceptions, right? Like the first thing I thought of was red 3, because that's a really easy slottable card in the deck. And what that will do is red 3 is going to give the ghost raid 1, which will then give all the other specters units raid 1. And then those specter units will already gain raid 1 from red 3 because they'll be heroism units. And so essentially what you're getting is raid 2 with red 3 with the ghost out with all your other specter units. But there's so many different things that are wrong with this card, in my opinion. Obviously, it's cool with the Phantom and docking and things like that, but we already talked about how the Phantom isn't really going to be all that great if the ghost is a little bit more expensive, and that would be the case. Now, if we remember what the Phantom is doing, because right, the Phantom will be able to dock with the ghost, you're going to be able to get grit and +3/+3 to the ghost, which is going to give grit to all your other specter units. But you have to have the ghost out, which is a 5-drop. You have to have some sort of upgrade or some sort of thing passing around keywords, and then you have to have other specter units to be able to benefit from those keywords. And if you ever get the ghost removed, it's removing that whole strategy. A 5-resource 5/6 space unit is just not really what you're looking for in a lot of these different kinds of decks. Now, you could go with more value centric where you're playing like Hera, and hopefully we'll get a Hera leader here soon, but you're playing like Hera old version, and you've got Sabine's Masterpiece, and you're playing like Ezra, Sabine, Kanan, the Ghost, Zeb, and all the different random stuff in the deck. But even if you're doing all of that, and you're trying to benefit from playing all the different aspects and playing all the specters, I still don't see the Ghost really pulling in work, which is a little bit unfortunate. I was really hoping for a cheaper version of the Ghost. If this was like a 4-resource 4/5, I would be much more interested in it because it's cheaper. But 5 resources is a big uptick. And even a 4-resource 4/5, let's say, with these abilities, I don't think it would be insane or anything. I think it would be potentially usable, not even necessarily like a staple. That's where we're at. Next up, we've got Nebula Ignition. This is a 9-cost event in Vigilance. It's defeat each unit that isn't upgraded. Pretty straightforward and pretty interesting, but not that insane, right? If you look at Super Laser Blast, which is obviously the card that this is going to be immediately compared to, Super Laser Blast has no restrictions. And before, you're like, okay, well, aren't there going to be decks without pilots and things like that? Yeah, of course. But remember, you've got experience tokens, you've got shield tokens, you've got all these other random ways to go ahead and give out some sort of upgrade, to where I do find that Nebula Ignition will oftentimes not defeat all units, and will oftentimes leave behind a couple of different units. Now, you might be able to use this in your own upgrade-based deck, but if you are playing a deck with units that you're upgrading, you probably aren't lasting to 9 resources. Now, I guess the best thing about this is that you get it in heroism for 9, which is okay. But to be honest, I'd rather play Super Laser Blast for 10 resources over Nebula Ignition because of the uncertainty of you being able to kill everything on the board. I mean, Super Laser Blast just straight up defeat all units. All units. And again, you can make this a little bit more one-sided in Nebula Ignition, where you upgrade your own units and you prevent your own units from dying. But I found that decks that are looking to do that type of game plan aren't going to be getting to 9 resources and aren't going to be interested in this, like trying to build a one-sided Wrath. Super Laser Blast is by far a better, universally good card than Nebula Ignition. Next up, we've got ourselves a pretty interesting one, and this one I think is the best one of the ones that we're going to talk about today. Cham syndulla. This is a 4-cost ground unit in aggression. It is a 5/4 rebel with Twi'lek, and it says when played, if an opponent controls more resources than you, you may put the top card of your deck into play as a resource. Pretty straightforward, but very, very interesting. Of course, this is going to require your opponent to be ramping or playing Han, but in those scenarios, this is going to be pretty powerful. I think it's more of a sideboard card, but if you're looking at your deck and you're going, oh, I'm playing Sabine, or I'm playing, something like Han, like old Han, or I'm playing, I should say, set 2 Han, or I'm playing some sort of Rey Red or Anakin Blue, and your opponent's ramping at all, this is going to be a card that you're going to want to consider, because this is now a ramp option, a 5/4 body for 4, which is a pretty solid body. That's something that's definitely something you're looking for. And it has the Rebel tag. I could even see this as a sideboard option for Sabine, right? You play this, you get to ramp a little bit, you get to get out your wrecker a turn earlier than you normally would have. I don't know if Sabine would be the specific card that or the deck that I'd really be interested in this, but I do think things like Rey Red, Anakin Blue, those types of decks where you are playing a more mid-range style and you are actually getting to things like Crate Dragon and Luke's, Cham syndulla fits perfectly if your opponent is going to be ramping. And there's a lot of decks that play resupplies, super laser technicians, commands, etc., etc., etc. So this card has some major potential, in my opinion. Next up, we've got Swarming Vulture Droid. And honestly, out of all the cards here, this is the coolest. I do think Cham is the best in terms of playability, but I think Swarming Vulture Droid is just the coolest. 2-cost space unit, 2/2. It's got no aspects. It's a separatist droid vehicle fighter. A deck can have up to 15 copies of Swarming Vulture Droid, and this unit gets +1/+0 for each other friendly Swarming Vulture Droid. Of course, the idea behind this one is you play a bunch of droids, it pumps up all your other droids, and you get to do some really cool stuff. Now, one thing that I really think that this maybe come into play is the Invisible Hand. And I think this is why Swarming Vulture Droid and Invisible Hand work as they do. But if you remember the Invisible Hand, it's a 6-cost unit that when you play it and when it completes an attack, you get to search the top 8 cards of your deck, I believe, for a droid. And if it costs 2 less, you can play it for free, right? So the idea is you get the Invisible Hand down and you start just grabbing Vulture Droids, and then they start to swarm your opponent, which is awesome, by the way. Absolutely sweet. And I'm just imagining this in, like, let's say you're playing Count Dooku or something like that, and you get to exploit out the Invisible Hand soon. You just start to completely swarm your opponent with Vulture Droids. I think there could be something there. Like, there could be something really cool with that. Like a very separatist-focused droid-based deck, or maybe even like a General Grievous, where you're able to triple dark raid out Invisible Hand, where you can play that on like turn 3. Like, can you imagine turn 3? And you're pumping out an Invisible Hand, get to attack for 6, get to get 2 more Vulture Droids off the top of your deck. I'm imagining with 15 copies of that card in your deck, you're almost never missing with the Invisible Hand. And of course, you'll be playing other cards in your deck alongside that, but that just seems really, really sweet. I don't know. The idea behind that is just absolutely awesome. I love cards like this, and they're more janky than good, but it would be a very fun experience to go ahead and Vulture Droid your opponent, right? Vulture Droid your opponent. That just sounds really, really cool to me. Next up, we've got Invincible, which is another separatist. It's a 6-cost space unit in Cunning Villainy. It's a 6/6 separatist vehicle capital ship. If you control a unique separatist card, this unit costs 1 less to play. And when you deploy a leader, you may return a non-leader unit that costs 3 or less to its owner's hand. So the idea is you have Invincible out, you deploy your leader, and you get to essentially clear the field, or Geonosis Patrol Fighter, which is kind of interesting. Now, you're not really going to get the discount on this all that much, because there's not that many separatist unique units. If I just think about like separatist cards in general, you have like Count Dooku, General Grievous. There's some droids that I forget the name of from set 3. the new spaceships like Invincible or the Invisible Hand, obviously, but Invincible can't pay for the itself discount. So that's not really going to happen. But, you know, getting a bounce when you deploy a leader is kind of interesting. And it's mainly for the synergy with its pilot. Or I should say I guess you could say leader? Admiral Trench. And I figured we'd talk about this guy before I complete my evaluation on Invincible. This is a really interesting leader, and they're doing this thing where you are able to reuse your leaders throughout the game. So we have an action to discard a card that costs 3 or more from your hand if you do draw a card. So you're able to just go ahead and filter in the early game, which is really not too bad. We've seen this with Yoda. And then we deploy as a 6 deploy leader. But it's not quite a 6 to deploy leader because it costs 3 action or 3 resources and to exhaust Trench. So essentially, in order to use him, you need the 6 resources, but you can go ahead and deploy the leader as 4/5 for 3 resources. And if I just pop over to the post because I don't see the back of this, he deploys a 4/5 as I mentioned, and you're able to reveal the top 4 cards of your deck. An opponent discards 2 of them, and you draw 1 of the remaining cards and discard the other. So essentially, your opponent gives you the 2 worst cards, the top 4 cards, and then you get a 50-50 shot to hit the best one of those 2. So 6 costs 4/5. 6 to deploy 4/5 is horrible. It's horrible, but it doesn't cost you 6 resources. Now, there is no epic action with this guy, right? So you can't deploy him for free. He must cost 3 resources. And the idea here with Invincible is that you are able to deploy Trench, and then you're able to deploy Invincible, ideally, by saving some resources on Trench, and you'll have that unique Separatist unit. I don't necessarily think this guy is that great. I don't think the drawing a single card off the top 4, the essentially worst half of those top 4 cards for 3 resources, even though it's only for 3 resources and he is a 4/5, the fact that you can only do it on turn 5 is what really holds this card back. I think if it was able to be done on 5 resources, there's something there. But to me, you either are ramping with this guy and trying to take advantage of the ability to use up a lot of more resources or use up a less amount of resources for a little bit of value because you're able to draw some cards with Trench and you're able to take advantage of those extra cards with the ramp that you have, or you're not really doing anything. Now, it does work. Like, I think Trench plus Invisible Hand plus Invincible plus Swarming Vulture droids, I mean, you have something there a little bit, but I don't think it's all that powerful. Outside of that, I mean, what can you do? You could play him in a Separatist deck, but I just don't know if you're really interested in that. I just don't find him fitting in with any specific strategy right now. Like, there's nothing with discarding cards, really, or there's nothing with, filtering through your library that could be nice, but I don't know. Maybe someone else will find something. But that's going to be the end of the spoilers, guys. I am extremely excited to be able to get an Executor on the battlefield at least once. It's going to be fun. The Ghost, can we find something that's going to be able to bump up your whole team? Nebula Ignition, am I too harsh on this card, or would I rather just pay 10 for Super Laser Blast and Heroism? Cham syndulla, I think this card is probably the best one here. Ramping in red, catch-up ramp a little bit. Swarming Vulture Droid, guys, we're definitely going to be making a deck with this. And I do think the Invisible Hand with Swarming Vulture Droid, maybe with Count Dooku, or maybe with Trench, there could be something there. Invincible and Trench itself, do we see anything outside of maybe some meme strategies? I don't know. Let me know in the comments section down below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all for the next one.